The top 1% of editors all have mastered this editing technique. It's used by Magnates Media, Internet Anarchist, and Sonny V2. And to most editors, this editing technique seems impossible to learn. But that could not be further from the truth. And I know that because I mastered this editing technique all by myself. So in this video, I'm going to teach you documentary style face animations. And I've broken that down into 3 steps. Step 1. Image generation. In this step, we're going to find the image that we'd like to use. We're then going to upscale it if needed using a free website. We will then take it into Photoshop where we will separate it into 3 distinct layers. Step 2. Face animations. In this step, we will take the layers into After Effects and animate them using the puppet tool. Step 3. Camera movements. In this step, I challenge you to do the 3D camera movements by yourself, as I taught that in the last video, and if you haven't watched that already, click in the pop-up in the top right. And of course, stick around to the end as I've included 2 free bonus tricks to improve your edit. And on top of that, I've also included a free cheat sheet document which explains how to do this technique. And also, I've added the project files and the assets linked in the description below, so you can take a look at them for yourself. Now let's get into it. So step 1, we're going to find the image that we want to use. Now, for this, I recommend that you use someone that you like a favorite artist or favorite actor or something. This means when you recreate this for yourself, it's going to be more personal to you, so you're more likely to remember what we learned today. So today, I have chosen Kendrick Lamar, specifically this photo here. Now you might notice that this photo is only 640 by 640. But we're going to be working with 1920 by 1080 compositions. So what we need to do is that we need to upscale this image. And to do that, we're going to use a free website called Upscale Media. Now all we're going to do is we're going to right click on the image and save it. You can save this anywhere that you like. Now the download should appear in the top right. So next we're just going to search up Upscale Media. Click on the top link, come to the downloads here and just drag it in. Now, the website will just do all the work for us. Now, as you can see, it's upscaled it 2 times, so it's now 1280 by 1280. But we could get the image a little bigger. So we can just come to the bottom here where it says upscale to, and we'll just select 4x. So now we have a 2560 by 2560 image, which is perfect. So all we're gonna do is just come down to download image, click it, and head into Photoshop. So now we're in Photoshop, we're just going to drag and drop our image. Now it should appear in the middle of your screen. Now the first thing you might notice is that this is a square image, and this will be difficult to work with when we take it into After Effects. So what we want to do is we want to widen the composition. Now to do that, it's easy. We just come to the crop tool here. We're going to make sure our ratio is set to 16 by 9, and we're just going to increase the size of it here, and then just drag the image into the middle of this. Now it's okay if you've got a little bit at the top and the bottom. This would actually help us because it just makes the image a little bit bigger. So I've dragged it into the middle. I've got something looking like this. So all we're going to do is press generative expand, and we're going to leave the prompt blank. Just press generate. So we have our 3 generations. Let's take a look at what we've got. I like the look of this one the most. Now I've selected which one I like the most, I'm going to come to the bottom right here, and I'm going to select both holding shift and left clicking. Then I'm going to press Ctrl and E to merge the images. So now we just have one flat image. What we're going to do next is we're going to select this new layer, and we're going to come up to select, then select and mask. Now we're going to select out the subject of the photo. So what we're going to do is we're going to select this object selection tool. Now usually this tool can easily identify the subject of the photo, but if there's a lot in the background or there's similar colors, it might mess it up a little bit. In this case, it's identified the subject very well. So I'm just going to click on this here. Now, if that doesn't work perfectly, and let's say it doesn't identify your subject, you can always use this brush tool here, and all you need to do is just drag and select your subject. Now anything in red will be excluded from the mask, but anything that's clear will be included in the mask. So make sure that your subject is clear, and also ensure that you don't have any bits of background in the image. So you can hold Alt and left click to get rid of these small pieces of background. And also make sure that the hair doesn't have any small pieces like that either. And this looks pretty good. So once you've got your subject selected, we're going to come to the bottom right and select Output to New Layer with Layer Mask. And then we're going to press OK. So as you can see, we've separated our subject from the background. Although on the background, he's still there. So once we animate the 3D camera, we're going to have a weird thing where he's doubled up. And we don't want this. We want the background to be clear. And luckily, that's quite easy to do. So come to the bottom right and select the eye tool on the top layer. Now select the mask and hold Alt and left click and drag it onto the bottom layer. Now we're going to right click, come up to Add Mask to Selection, and then delete this layer mask. So all we've done is we've just added a selection around the subject. And next we're going to generative fill within this selection. So come to this brush tool here and click it and press expand selection. We're just going to expand it by roughly 10 pixels. This just gives us a little bit of space between the selection and the person. You can even expand it a little more. And then we're going to press generative fill and we're going to leave the prompt blank. And just press generate. Now let's take a look at our generations. And out of these three, I prefer this one the most. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come to the bottom right, I'm going to hold shift, going to select both, and then I'm going to press Ctrl E to merge the images. Now I'm going to name this background, just so we know which layer that is. Next, we're going to separate the head from the body. And we do this just so we can slightly animate the head so it moves just a little bit. And this makes it look a little bit more realistic because otherwise the whole body is static and it doesn't sell the effect. In order to do that, we're going to come to the bottom right. We're going to right click on the layer mask and press Apply Layer Mask. Next, we're going to come up to Select and Mask and we're going to mask out the head only. So to do that, we're going to use this brush tool here. Now I'm going to increase the size a little bit. And I'm just going to hold left click and drag around the face. Now you can see that it started to select the neck. And we don't want this. So all I'm going to do is just use my tool, holding Alt this time so I can add more red, so I can exclude more things from the mask. And I'm just going to select around the beard. Now it's easier with images that don't have a beard, but today he has a beard, so we just have to work around this and get a rough mask. It doesn't have to be perfect. To me, this looks pretty good, so we're going to come to the bottom right and press New Layer with Layer Mask. Then press OK. Now as I mentioned in the previous video, we can come into this layer mask here and we can select the brush tool, and now we can make small changes to our mask. So set your two colors here to black and white, and anything in black will remove things from the mask. And all we're doing is just smoothing out this edge here. Now to me, that looks perfect. Now all I'm going to do is right click on the layer mask and press Apply Layer Mask. So we've got our 3 layers, and to me, this looks pretty good. So it seems like we're done. We have our 3 layers. Although you might notice that if we start to move the head, we're going to have another one appear here, and that is an issue. So all we need to do to fix that is Alt and left click and drag the layer mask onto the bottom layer. Then I'm just going to deselect this top layer here. Then I'm going to right click, add the mask to selection, and then I'm going to delete the layer mask. And then I'm just going to press backspace, and this deletes the face. Now I can see that I've got a little bit of hair which I missed out, which is fine. We can just use the eraser tool and delete this. And you might want to increase the size of this, but just come around and delete any outline here if there is one. So now we have the body, we have the head, and we have the background. Now you can see there's a little bit of a gap here. So all we need to do is just select the top layer and drag it down slightly. There we go. So we have our 3 layers which we're going to take into After Effects and then animate with the puppet tool. So all we need to do now is just come up to File and then Save As, and just save this into any file that you want. I'll see you in After Effects. Now we're just going to create a new composition and just copy these settings here. Now just drag over the Photoshop file into the composition. We're going to set the import kind to composition and the layer options to editable layer styles. Then just press OK. Now double click on this new composition here. We're going to select all of the layers. Then we're going to press Ctrl C to copy. And then we're going to come back to the main composition and press Ctrl V to paste. Now you can delete this bottom composition here. Now we're going to select all of these layers again. And we're going to press S on the keyboard. Now we're just going to scale it down so it fits the composition. Now come to the Align panel. Now if you don't have this, just come to Window and select Align. And we're just going to select Align Layers 2. We're going to change this to Composition. And we're just going to select this middle here and then that middle here. This will just make sure that everything is centered. Now this is the most fun part of the tutorial. We're now going to create pins in order to animate the face. Now I'm going to give you an in-depth explanation of how this tool works in order to just help your understanding. Now I'll meet you in the explanation. So in order to explain to you how the pins work, I've got this amazing thing which I cut out. It took me 5 hours. Please subscribe. And I'm going to teach you using this. So essentially, creating a pin with the puppet tool looks like this. Let's say I'm making one pin at the head and I'm making another one at the bottom. Now, if I was to move the bottom pin, this is what would happen. It's going to rotate around the head because I've created a pin here. And if I was to move the head pin, it would rotate around the foot because I've created a pin there. Now you can animate both pins and that would look like this. Now the location of the pins do matter. So if I create one at the belly and then I create one at the leg, it's going to rotate around this point rather than the head. And obviously I can also move this waist pin. Now you're probably thinking, what if I don't want the whole body to move? Well, this is where we create multiple pins. So let's say I create 4 pins here. Well, now only the leg is going to move because I've created so many pins here that this is now going to be stagnant. Whereas if I just had one, it moves. Multiple doesn't move. And it works exactly like shown. Now there are 2 laws which I want you to remember when you're using the puppet tool. The first law is the law of conservation of mass. All this means is that if you create a ball this big, when that ball bounces, it doesn't lose or gain mass. It stays the same. But when it hits the ground, it might squash a little bit, but essentially the amount of mass that the ball contains remains the same. So this mass equals this mass. So let's say that we have a nose like this. This nose should not become this nose. That nose is too big. So whatever you do, whatever changes you make, just make sure that whatever you change looks the same mass, that it looks the same size. Whether it's bent or stretched, it still contains the same amount of mass. And that's the law of conservation of mass when we apply it to the After Effects puppet tool. Now we have the law of cause and effect. Now I'm going to draw a face and he's going to have a straight face. If we want to make this guy smile, his cheeks need to move upwards because that is what pulls these parts of the mouth into the smiling position. And we just need to apply this to every part of the movement. So let's say he's got eyebrows like this, but he's smiling now. So we want to move his eyebrows upwards. Well, what muscle is moving it upwards? Think. Well, there's muscles here, but also this is going to move upwards too. And this is going to move upwards too. The eyebrows moving is not the cause. It's the effect of the muscles moving. So let me show you what that looks like. Face, smile, contracted cheeks, eyebrows perked up. These muscles are now contracted. So now we understand how the puppet tool works and the 2 laws that we need to remember when using it. We can now get into actually using it in After Effects. Let's go. What we're going to do is we're going to select the puppet tool up here. To make this a little bit more simple, I'm going to take away the body here. So all we can see is the face. Now all we're going to do is create pins around the face like this. And you don't need to create pins around the ears or the hair. Now if your subject doesn't have a beard, then you don't need to follow this step. But in this case, he does have a beard. So what we need to do is we just need to create pins above the beard line. Now we're going to create 8 pins around the mouth. So we're going to place 1 at the left side, 1 at the top middle, one at the right side, and one at the bottom middle. Next, we're going to create one in between these. So we're going to place one roughly here, 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 and here. These will control the movement of the lips. Next, we're going to create 3 at the bottom of the nose. So we're going to place one in the middle, one on the left nostril, and one at the right nostril. These will control the movements of the nose. Next, we're going to create 1 pin on each cheek. So I'm going to place this here and here. These will control the movements of the cheeks. No diddy. Next, we're going to create around 8 to 10 pins around each eye. Now you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pins. Next, I'm just going to do that on the other eye. Perfect. And these will control the movements of the eye. Next, we're going to create 1 pin above each eye, like so. Once you've done that, we're going to create 4 pins on each eyebrow. And finally, we're going to add 1 more pin in the middle of the eyebrows. So as you can see, we've now added all of the pins for the face. And we're going to use these pins in order to animate facial expressions. Now the keyframes with the puppet tool can become a little bit complicated. So I've created a dedicated section just to explain this to you a little bit. I'll meet you in the explanation. When using the puppet tool, keyframes are automatically placed. And typically when animating the face, you're only going to have 2 locations for the keyframes. So when making a change, make sure that the playhead is on the same position as the previous keyframes. Otherwise, you're going to start creating keyframes where you don't want to. So for example, let's say our beginning keyframes are at 0 seconds and our end keyframes are at 2 seconds. Now let's say that you went to the beginning and you just wanted to watch the animation that you made, but this time you pause at 1 second. If you moved one of the pins while the playhead is at 1 second, it's going to create new keyframes at 1 second. So now we're going to have 3 keyframes. We want to make sure that any changes made to the pins are going to happen either at 2 seconds if that's where you need it, or at 0 seconds. And I say this because there's been many times where I've created keyframes where I don't want to. So just be mindful of that. Now let's say you want to create a new pin because you forgot to do it previously. Well, any new pins that we create, we need to do at 0 seconds. This is because it will place the beginning keyframe at 0 seconds. If we create the new pin at 2 seconds, then there will only be 1 keyframe, so it will not animate. Let's say I created a pin here, right? And I made it smile. Well, if you create it at 2 seconds, there's no animation going from here to here. There's just gonna be a pin holding it up here. But what we want is at the beginning, relaxed position, then it moves up. But like I said, if we create it at 2 seconds, there will only be 1 keyframe. So just to reiterate, if all of the beginning keyframes are at 0 seconds, make sure that you create any new pins with the playhead at 0 seconds too. And that's all for the keyframe explanation. So now that we've added all of the pins and we understand how the keyframes work, now it's time to animate the facial expressions. To make this easier for yourself, you can find a reference image on Google of someone smiling. So you can see what muscles are moving in order to make a smile. You can see that the cheeks contract and they move upwards. This is what makes the mouth move into the smile position. The nose is also going to slightly widen because the cheeks have also contracted. You can see that usually the eyebrows sit in more of a perky position. And due to the eyebrows moving upwards, that means that this muscle here is going to also slightly move upwards too. And as the cheeks are now contracted, no diddy, you can see that the eyes squint because the muscle has now moved upwards. So the eyes have to contract too. Now you can also use your own face for reference. So if you smile yourself, you can feel your cheeks move up and contract. You can see that your eyebrows slightly move up and your eyes squint. So when I smile, I can feel that my cheeks contract, my eyes slightly squint, and my eyebrows kind of go in an incline. Oh, and also my nose slightly widens because my mouth has moved up. So all we need to do is just replicate this using the puppet tool. Now if I open the puppet tool by pressing the arrow here, then come into effects, puppet, mesh, and then deform, you can see all of the pins that we've created. Now these automatically create keyframes. So when you create a pin, it will create a keyframe. Now when we start the animation, I'm going to tell you to move to about 1 second. Now this is because when we move the keyframes, it will automatically create one. So if we move the playhead to 1 second, it will automatically create keyframes at 1 second. If you do miss out any of the pins and you need to create a new one, make sure that you bring the playhead to the beginning of the composition. So it will create the first keyframe at the beginning, and when you move it back to 1 second, it will then create the second keyframe here. Otherwise, it will just create one keyframe at the 1 second mark. Just remember, if you create new pins, just do it at the beginning of the timeline. So in order to see the keyframes that we made, I'm going to select this bottom pin here. I'm going to hold shift and scroll up to the top, and then I'm going to hold shift and left click. Now we've selected all of our pins, and then I'm going to press U on the keyboard. Now we can see all of our pins that we've created. Now we don't need to know what pin is what, because if we move anything here, it will create a keyframe. So I'm going to move the playhead to 1 second, and this is where we're going to start keyframing. We're going to first start with the mouth. Now remember how I told you that the mouth moves like this? So all we're going to do is move these pins into the smile position. Now you can see that these pins hold still, so we need to also keyframe these. And also this one. You're going to notice that all of the keyframes need to move in order to make this smile look authentic. Now this looks a little bit dodgy because I have made this one go too high. So I'm just going to make sure that everything is proportionate. Make sure that his lips don't become too big, like here, they're too big. So I need to drag this upwards. And maybe even move this pin so it's a little bit below the lip. Now remember what I said, if we're going to make new pins, we need to move the playhead to the beginning of the timeline. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to select this pin here and I'm going to delete it. Now I've deleted that pin, I'm going to make sure I'm at the beginning of the timeline. Then I'm going to make this new pin at the bottom of the lip here. Now when we move it, it makes the movement that I like. Now I'm going to move the playhead back to the 1 second mark, and then I'm going to keyframe this again. Now as you're going to see, the nature of this tool is very much trial and error. You can see this animation I've created here. It's actually coming out too wide, and that's why this looks really weird. So all I need to do, come to the 1 second mark, I'm going to select our pin tool here, up here. And if you can't see any of the pins, just select one of them in the bottom left. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually bring these back a little bit closer to the mouth because they're going too far out. And you can see the keyframe that we made is coming out way too far. Or it was out here, which was too far. So I'm going to drag it a little bit closer and there's still movement. I'm just going to check this side. That's a little too much. Just increase it to about there. And now our smile is a lot more authentic. It doesn't move too much. Now the lip could look a little smaller here. So I'm just going to drag this up. Press H to use the hand tool. Come back to the pin tool. Just going to decrease the size of that lip here. Now we've got a much more authentic looking smile. Now we need to think what moved the lips, and it's actually the cheek muscles which made that happen. So again, I'm going to select one of these here so I can view all the pins. I'm going to come to the 1 second mark and I'm going to animate these cheeks here to move upwards because these are what are contracting. Now let me give you a preview of what we've made so far. You can see that it's very subtle, but it makes all the difference in selling this effect. Just a slight movement by the cheeks, it just shows that they are what are moving the lips. I'm just going to move it a little bit higher just to sell the effect. Next, I'm going to come to the nose. So make sure you got your pin tool selected, and I'm just going to make the nose come a little bit wider because the mouth has moved upwards. So that's now squashing the nose. The nose now needs to move outwards. And I'm doing this because the cheek muscles are pulling the nose just slightly. You can see my nose flares if I smile. Just slightly moves a little bit wider. So that's why we're just animating the bottom of the nose. And let's take a look at that. Now we're starting to get quite an authentic smile. Next, we're going to come to the eyes. So as I said before, the eyes slightly squint when you smile. So we're just going to replicate that using the puppet tool. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this one slightly up, this one here too, just to create a slight squint in the eyes, like so. Now let's come up to our full view and let's take a look. Now you can see this correlates with the cheek movement. The cheeks are moving upwards, and this is also pushing up the eyelids. Perfect. So next, I'm going to come to the eyebrows. Now we're not finished with the eyes, but it makes more sense if we do the eyebrows first and then come back to the eyes. So I'm going to make sure that I'm at 1 second because this is where we've created all of our keyframes. And I'm then going to animate the eyebrows so they slightly move upwards, like this. And then I'm going to do that for the second eyebrow. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Now all that I've noticed here is that I didn't add keyframes for this part of the eyebrows, so I'm just going to go back in and do that. There we go. Now that looks authentic to me. Now all we need to do is just come back, make sure we're at 1 second, and you see this little pin we created above the eye? We just want to move this upwards a little bit, just so the eye regains that circular shape. Now let's take a look at what we've made. And all that's left now is to come to this little pin here that we made in the middle of the eyebrows and just move it upwards. And what we've done now looks like this. So we've created the smile. Now all that's left to do is to make sure that the spacing of the keyframes are all far enough apart, and also to create a nice curve in the speed time graph. In order to do that, I'm going to scroll down to where the bottom keyframe is. Now there's nothing below here, and I know that because that's just the outline. So once you've found the bottom keyframe, we're just going to left click and drag to select all of these keyframes here. Now I'm going to drag them out a little further apart to maybe 2 seconds and see if that's enough time for the animation. That looks much better. I'm just going to decrease it slightly. Then I'm going to come to the graph editor and I'm going to left click and drag to select all of the keyframes, and to make it easier for ourselves, I'm going to press F9 to easy ease all of the keyframes. Now you can see we have a graph looking like this. So let's take a look at what this looks like. Decent, but I just want to make it so the animation happens a little quicker at the beginning. So I'm just going to left click and drag on this right part here. Then I'm going to select these handles here and just drag them to the left slightly. Now this looks more authentic to me. So now I've taught you all about the puppet tool and you know how to use it. Now I have a challenge for you, and this is because I want to make sure that you get the most out of these videos. And in order to get the most out of these videos, I'm going to challenge you to do things yourself. The challenge now is that you're going to come to the beginning of the timeline and change these beginning keyframes so that the face looks angry. You already have all of the tools in order to do this, and this is just to accelerate your learning. So if you've been following along, this is your time to create an angry face. I will include a time lapse of me doing this, although I'm not going to explain it. Now let's go. So I've created this angry face here, and you can tell he looks pretty angry. Now, if I show you what he looks like before, he doesn't look as angry as he does here. So now that we've created all of the face animations, we're now just going to add the finishing touches. So that consists of making the head slightly move. Now, as I mentioned, we don't want to make a still image. And the reason that we created 3 separate layers is that we can now move the head slightly. Now, all I want to do is come to the position value of the head, and I'm going to do that by pressing P on my keyboard. Then I'm going to hold Alt and left click on the position value, and I'm going to enter the expression wiggle 1, 2, and this will make the head slightly move in its position. Next, I'm going to select the layer and press R on my keyboard. Then I'm going to press Alt and left click again, and I'm going to enter the expression wiggle 1, 1.5. So you can see that now the head slightly moves, and this just helps the scene feel a little bit more real. Now we're on to the final step, which is the 3D camera movements. Now before we get into that, I'm going to show you the 2 bonus tricks which I have, and what that is for the background. Now as you can see, the background is very bright, and it's competing with what you're looking at. So what we want to do is make the background just a little bit less noticeable. In order to do that, we're going to come to our effects panel here, and we're going to type in Lumetri color, and we're going to drag that onto the background layer. We will then come up to the top, open basic correction, and we're going to decrease the highlights to -100. This just makes the highlights a little less noticeable. You can see this makes a big difference. Next, we're going to set the exposure to -0.3, and this just makes it a little bit darker. So you can see so far, this is the change that we've made. You can see now he starts to stick out a little more. So we can add the lumetri color again and just increase the exposure slightly. And this makes him pop out a lot more, because sometimes you can always improve on the color correction of your image. So now you can see that he pops out a lot more compared to before. That was before, this is after. So now he pops out. So we're gonna hold Alt and left click on the stopwatch on exposure. We're going to type in the expression wiggle bracket 8, 0.125. Now this is just gonna add a slight flicker to the background. Now if this is too much, you can always just decrease this second value here. So maybe something like 0.1 is good enough. And to me, that looks pretty good. So when we pair that with the 2 bonus tricks I showed you in the last video, this is when we get a result like this. Now you can see what we've created looks pretty good. And all that's left is adding the camera movements. Now, I taught this in the last video, and again, I have a challenge for you, and that's to add the camera movements all by yourself. And to make it a little easier for you, for reference, in the cheat sheet, I have said exactly what you need to do to make the camera movements, although I'm not going to show you in this video. Now, if you're unsure about 3D camera movements, then watch the last video where I teach it in depth. Remember, this is all to accelerate your learning. The best way to get things in your head is to do things by yourself. So take a look at my last video, take a look at the cheat sheet, and use that to help you create the 3D camera movements. All the things that you need to help you is linked down below in the description. If this video was helpful, leave a like, subscribe, and a comment down below of what you'd like me to teach next. Thanks for tuning in, and well done for completing this entire tutorial. And with that being said, I'll catch you in the next one.